Um, Hi, I'm Ryan. I Today we'll be going through this CSS workshop for Melbourne Hack, and I know a lot of you are competing at Melbourne Hack for this year. So hopefully by the end of this workshop, you guys will be CSS warriors and you'll be able to make some cool stuff for your upcoming project this weekend. So we'll do a quick rundown of what we're going to cover. So we're going to be covering the basics of CSS. We'll be covering like rules and selectives and all that. And we'll look at some CSS libraries quickly. And we'll take a good deep dive into Bootstrap and how we can use that to build our websites. And finally, we'll have a final section to explore some more tools you guys can use to really build up your CSS knowledge and become like a master at it. So yeah, a little bit about me. I've been working with websites for 2 years now, and I've been working at 2 startups over at 50 Raw, and I love dogs, photography, and music. And yeah, you can also check out my site if you're curious about what I've been working on. Yeah, so let's just get right into it. So what is CSS and why use it? So if you've been in the web landscape for long enough, you'll know that we have like 3 foundational languages and when you're making websites. It's like HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. And and throughout the community, I just hear a lot of people like complain about how hard CSS is, and it definitely is. And people wonder like, what's the point of having CSS when we have HTML already? And you can already define all your elements on that page. Like what's the point of CSS? How does it help simplify this? And one big keyword that really explains why CSS is so good is because it's a declarative styling language. And declarative is kind of like opposite to imperative. If you went to the React workshop yesterday, you might have heard the word imperative and declarative. Declarative is, so the difference between the two is imperative is like doing everything yourself. If you are building a car, so you would have to like get the engine yourself, configure all of that, set its color and all of that. And declarative is kind of like telling someone what you want and then they go and do it for you, kind of like asking a mechanic to fix your car. So that's where CSS comes in. Like HTML, you can define all your tags and stuff, but CSS brings in magic to that because you're able to tell CSS how you want to style certain things in your HTML, and it goes ahead and does it for you. It's kind of like the mechanic in the situation. So having to go into the HTML and define everything manually, CSS is really powerful since you just tell it, okay, I want all my headings to be this certain size, and it goes ahead and does it for you. So it's like a declarative language, which is what makes it so good. And yeah, so you just declare your styles in the browser, applies those styles to the elements you specify, and it's broken down into selectors and rules. We'll be covering both of those. And yeah, what makes it so cool is that you abstract away the styling from your HTML. So you're able to make something really simple. You're able to simplify your code a lot. And yeah, that's mostly why it exists and why we're using it. So we'll quickly cover how to import CSS. We'll take a good look later. But yeah, there's really 2 ways. You can either grab a sheet from the web or from your local computer. This is like the recommended way because you're putting all of your CSS into one file. So for example, this one's importing a Autometer, like a utility thing. And you can also, if you want, just chuck the styles right into HTML. The first one is probably the best approach since you'll be able to put all your CSS into your own file and keep it organized. But if you're quickly prototyping, you can just chuck it right into HTML by putting it in style tags like that. And yeah, some libraries also do this as well when they're compiling your code like React. Some React libraries like to put all the styles right into HTML, the complete product. So yeah. And before we really dive into all the properties, I want to explain something quite important, which is like the box model in HTML and the DOM. So when you work with HTML, you have basically elements, right? And each of those elements kind of like its own box. And these boxes have different properties to them, like padding, border, margin, and the width and height and all that, right? And making websites is so much about being able to really have control over that, being able to tell where you want your elements to be, right? So being able to understand this box model is really, really important to being able to rearrange elements how you want them to and get them flowing, right? To make things just look good. Like you can just set colors and do whatever, but if your elements are all over the place, it's gonna be pretty hard to make a good flowing website. especially for different screen sizes. So yeah, these are some properties that I think you'll be using a lot if you're working with CSS. They are all to do with the box model and positioning. So yeah, instead of just talking about this, we'll hop right into a cool website that I use a lot called W3 to try explain the first styling, which is display. So let's hop right into that. So this is a website I recommend big time if you're learning CSS and HTML and stuff. It's really great because you can just search properties that you want to learn and it explains it for you in an interactive way. So if we look up display here and we go over here, see it shows us all the key display properties and what they do. So display none, as you can imagine, just doesn't show it at all. Display inline chucks it right with text. It kind of just treats it like text. Any element you can think of, it just keeps it in line with everything else on the page. Block is kind of like a new line, like block thing. It's like its own thing. And finally, there's inline block. And these two look quite similar, but we'll explore kind of how they differentiate soon. So this is probably something that you guys have used a lot before, but not like probably looked into it, but that's DevTools. If you press F12, you get this nice window. And I know a lot of people use this to like change their marks for their parents or something, but it's also a really great tool for CSS people, especially to be able to debug our websites and try to work out what's happening. How can we fix things? So if you click the little mouse icon here, you'll open the select and you can select exactly what element you want to explore. So yeah, we can quickly look at what this difference is between inline block and block. So you can see that inline is kind of like its own content thing, and inline block has these weird little orange things. And to get a better idea of what this actually is, if we open this up, oh look, that's that box model that was on the slides. So yeah, you can see that if we highlight, you can see this is the content, this is the width and height, this is like the root part of the box model. This is your element without any of the padding or whatever positioning stuff. Then you have the padding, the border, and the margin. So the margin is on the very outside. You can see that's orange. And let's try click this one here. So we have margin, border, padding, and let's try add some padding here. So if we do, so adding rules is as simple as just define the rule you want to do and then the value of that rule. So if we want to add padding, we can do like 15 pixels. Right? And you can see, look, it adds padding and the margin now. And if we highlight, we can see both of them working together. And yeah, so you're probably wondering like, what's the big difference between padding and margin? They look exactly the same. They just separate things from each other. But we can get a good understanding of this if we also add a border. So let's try adding a border. So the first thing is the width of the border. Let's make it 5 pixels so it's a little easier to see. And then you say what type of border you want. There's like solid, dashed. There's like a bunch of options. We'll just do solid. And I decided to put a color there. Okay, and then we can finally say the color that we want. So let's do like apple or something. You can see we have a nice border here now. And let's try explore what happens when we set padding and margin to this. So you can already see that the padding is on the inside, which makes sense, right? On the box model, there's border and then there's padding there, right? And let's see what happens when we change this to margin. You can instantly see that this thing shrinks all the way down to nothing, and then the element gets a lot of space around itself, right? So you can see how this box model is really important to understanding how all these properties work, since when you're using margin and padding, which is like probably the most often rule you use, it's very important to understand how it's affecting itself and the elements around it. So yeah, and when you're using backgrounds as well, so if we do a background, so it look very ugly, but if we do a green background, you can see how right now it's like empty, but if we change this to padding, suddenly it's the background expands, but everything around itself is shrunk. So yeah, that's a quick understanding of how the box model works and a quick look into the display property. I recommend you guys look into, where did the slides go? Okay, there we go. I recommend you guys look into all these properties on W3. They are all really useful and you'll probably be using them a lot. And yeah, so let's move on to these properties. So these are like text, MISC, and MISC properties. They kind of just like set just like the content itself, you know, the blue part where the actual content is, these kind of edit that, and they do what you expect. So you can align text left, right, center, underline, cross text, add bold font, or whatever you can think of. And these don't really affect the box model per se, but they allow you to actually change the content itself. And you saw that we were using background down here. You can also set image URLs, like an image for the background if you wanted to. And yeah, and I also recommend this quick website. It has a lot of these properties that you would use a lot, and they're all just laid out for you to play around with and see how they affect different things. So this is the border thing we were looking at. There's also different types of borders, and yeah, you can set colors and all that. So yeah, you'll be able to access all these links when I share the slides at the end. Yeah, so now let's look at selectors. So selectors were this part that you see at the top there in yellow. They're the thing that's on the outside of the bracket. And when I said that CSS is declarative, that's the part that you tell CSS like where you want these styles to apply to. And selectors are really, really powerful since you can select like a whole matter of elements and things and just make sure that you're selecting the right things that you want to select to really bring out cool effects. So there's a bunch of cool tags you can use in here. So there's the star for all elements. You can also just say the element that you want to change, and you can also do specific styles to IDs, classes, and you can also combine them using these characters. So the space means that you're selecting all p tags that are inside of divs, and you can also have commas to have multiple selectors, and they don't have any relation to each other. You can also do the greater than sign to select direct children. We'll be exploring these style selectors in more detail later. But yeah, they are a cool thing to keep in mind of. And we can even play around with them a bit inside of this window here. You can also edit the selector right here. So we could like get rid of that, and then you can see that it applied to all of the p tags in this document here. Right, previously it had the .ex3, which just selected this one because it has the .ex3 class on it, as you can see at the top in purple. But yeah, you can also try the other one, the star here, and apply that to everything, which looks quite ugly. But yeah, these are where the selectors go, and they say exactly what you're going to apply your styles to in CSS. All right, cool. Yeah, and also you can check out all these on W3, see what they do. It has really nice buttons. You can say try yourself. You just play around with sliders and stuff. So it's a very great way to learn. Yeah, cool. And we also have some special selectors. Selectors that act based off the state of the element. Like for example, if you hover over an A tag, you can change the color of the A tag to be like blue or something, or like add an underline when you hover over an A tag. A tag is, by the way, a link on our website. And you can also like add styles to specific types of elements, like a radio button. And these are probably my favorite. You can actually add elements to the DOM. DOM is the HTML document in a short sense. You can add elements to the DOM right after a tag. So you can add before or after, and you can see both of these being used here. So I use the p after tag to add a nice underline, nice orange cool underline thing under the text. And you could do a p before tag to add a nice little quote before a tag. So yeah, these are like special selectors that allow you to select based off the state, or even like add elements to the DOM. And there's a lot of other ones. Like there's like a last of tag, nth children, so you can select the nth element in a list. So there's a lot of cool selectors, and they all like share this pattern where you like do colon and then what you want to select. So there's a lot out there. You can look it up at W3 as well to see what kind of stuff you can do with those. And yeah, so next thing I want to go into is just stressing the importance of making websites that work on everything, right? When you're a web developer, you have no clue who's going to be using your website, right? They could be using it on a phone, on like their big 4K TV, or on like their tiny watch for some reason, right? So even though they might do that annoy us, it's important that we make sure that these websites work on all those devices no matter what. So CSS was built around this thing just to make sure that it's responsive and works no matter the screen size, right? You need to remember when you're making websites, it's not about just seeing if it works on your browser. You do resize it, do whatever, and see if it works on everything. And I can show you a quick tool that the DevTools offers. If we jump back in here, if you click this little phone thing, it simulates the website on a phone. You can like select different phones. So yeah, it's built everywhere, and it's really important to make sure that your sites work no matter the device size. So we can look into some rules that CSS offers to help make this a possibility. So one thing is media queries. I'm not going to go too deep into these, but they're not that complicated. You can just copy these and try it out yourself. But they basically allow us to activate styles only when the display is within a certain range of values. So they mostly apply to width, because if you think about it, most websites, like the responsiveness is all about how wide a display is. So you can apply different rules based off how wide our display is, because that's a good indication of whether we're working on a big TV or like a small phone. And that's exactly what media queries do here. So media only screen and only apply this if the max width is below, if the width is below 400. So it's applying it until we reach the maximum and then it stops working. So this will keep all the headings or whatever the heading class is to the color red until it's above 400. So this will be really useful. You probably wouldn't do colors, that doesn't really make sense. But if you had margin and padding, you can remove those margin and padding on a smaller screen because you probably don't have space to keep those. And yeah, you can also do min width. So then that means that it would only apply if the screen is larger than 400. So it will only apply on TVs. This is really useful for the display none. So you could hide an element with display none if the element is too big for a small screen. And you can also do ranges like here. And yeah, the media queries, I honestly don't use them too much because they're like at raw at least, because they're quite cumbersome to like define all these. So we'll be exploring some libraries later that allow you to do this a lot easier. And yeah, you can also read up a little more from W3. And finally, we'll be covering Flexbox, which is probably like one of the most useful tools in CSS when you're making responsive websites. So Flexbox is kind of like, you can kind of think of it like Word inside of websites, where it offers a lot of nice tools for us to like center text, center things, move things, or rearrange things. And based off how many elements you have, it can arrange them in such a way that they all fit on the page, and it's quite magical. So yeah, like most websites nowadays, they probably use Flexbox the majority of the time for most of their layouts. And yeah, we'll jump right into a demo to try see how it would work. And we have some steps here as well. So let's jump right into our code. Yeah, so we have this nice little website. It's not too fancy, but it has a bunch of rules that we just covered earlier. You can see how it looks without the rules. Absolute garbage. And then if you, well, what the hell? Let's not do that. Okay, there we go. And then if we put the rules back, then we have our nice website. Yeah, so let's quickly cover some of the rules that we just learned. So this just sets the margin of the body. The body has a default margin. If we don't have this and it has this like ugly thing around, this is just a default thing browsers have. So if you want a nice seamless continuation, you just set the margin to 0, right? And yeah, so this sets the height of the hero. The hero is this section. Hero in web terminology is kind of like the very first thing that the user sees when they load the website. That's what hero is. You can see that we set the height to 100 BH. So these are unit types. We have a bunch of units in CSS. And yeah, we covered pixels earlier, but there are a bunch. So this one is vertical height. Sorry, viewport height. So this is the viewport from here to here. And this has like a certain pixel count, right? How many pixels tall is this? And viewport height allows you to just take a percentage and apply that. Take a percentage of the viewport height and set that as the height of an element. So if we say 100 viewport height, we're saying 100 of this, and if we say 50, it should take only like 50% of the page as so. So yeah, it's pretty useful. And there's also viewport width, but that won't make too much sense because, well, the width is quite small here. I mean, this is a height and we're setting width, but yeah, there's also viewport width and viewport height. And finally, this is the display flex that we were looking at earlier. So we can take a quick look at what this is doing. DevTools also offers a lot of cool features to allow us to debug our flex layouts. So if we get rid of this, make some more space here, and select this, we can see, maybe we can just make this full screen actually. Yeah, we can see that this is our flex layer. And if we click this, it gives us really nice UI to try and like set up our Flexbox nice and easily. So yeah, Flexbox right now here is helping us center the element right at the center. Like if we were to get rid of this flex style, it just kind of goes to the top and takes the whole thing, right? That's like the default behavior, right? But by applying flex, we're able to start applying all these properties to control how we want the element to be arranged on the page. So I think this is a really cool learning tool to be able to just get started with Flexbox. You just set display flex, you can play around with these to see how it places the elements. So justify content is on the x-axis. Oh, sorry, if it's row, it's the x-axis. On row, it's the x-axis. So yeah, you can set where you want the elements to be. Center, flex starts at the beginning, flex end. And these don't really work because you need multiple elements, but we'll look at that soon. And you can also align items from the top, bottom, stretch it to the whole screen. And yeah, so you can see how useful this is to just like lay things out just magically. And the great part is when you resize, it automatically keeps it at the center and does everything for you. And there's also this nice flex button to just show where the unused space of flex is and where it's being applied. And yeah, so we also have another flex box here. And this is what allows us to be responsive here and just make sure that our things don't like break each other and get hidden when you make the screen smaller. So they arrange themselves nicely in a vertical pattern when you resize. So this is another flex box. You can press flex here to see it. And we can check out the properties applied to this. So yeah, we also have the justify thing to make sure it's in the center. And we also have align items. This won't work because, well, it's not very tall. But if we make this taller, we'll be able to align items as well. Yeah, it won't work because the height is like set. We're not setting an explicit height, so it's not bothered to arrange anything, see, because it's quite tight. But if this was a tall, like really tall, it would also move it up and down. And yeah, we also have this wrap ability. So the wrap is what actually makes it arrange itself so easily. It's like wrapping text. So without it, it just arranges side by side. But with wrap, this is like the magic ingredient to help make it responsive. So it automatically tries to fit it side by side. If it can't, it just moves to a new line. And yeah, you can see how all these properties work. Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's very neat tool. Yeah, so try it out on your own containers. There are a few steps here to help you get started. And yeah, it's a very useful tool. Yeah, so now that we're done with that, we'll start covering some CSS libraries to make our CSS better. So what we just covered was like the quick basics. We explored the box model and all of that. But as I kind of hinted to earlier, there's a lot of things that aren't too easy to deal with when you're doing CSS, like media queries and the flexbox with some, when you have a lot of elements, like if you wanted to make some things bigger or smaller. And yeah, luckily the community has us covered, and they made a lot of really awesome utilities to help us write CSS better and style our web pages a lot easier. So what we'll be covering in this course is Bootstrap. It's one of the most mature ones out there, and it provides base templates for buttons, lists, grids, whatever you can think of. And there's also Material UI. This is really good for you React people. It's incredibly powerful and links to React so well. So I highly recommend it if you're working with React in your hackathon project or any other project. It's backed by Google's Material Design Standard, and it offers a lot of really neat features like CSS and JS. You can look that up. It's like putting CSS along with the JS, so it's nice and organized. And yeah, finally, there's entire languages just based off CSS. So one is SCSS or SAS, and it gives CSS programming features like functions and variables and all like everything you can expect from like a language, a proper language. So yeah, and it compiles down into CSS. So yeah, we'll be covering Bootstrap here. So let's just get right into it. I think one really important tool as a developer is to be able to not like rely on workshops and like YouTube tutorials and stuff and try see if you can get things going with the documentation first. So that's kind of like how we're going to get this workshop going. We're going to try build out our website by using the official Bootstrap documentation. So yeah, let's just try installing it by following what they are saying, and we'll try explore some of these terms as well as we come to them. So if we jump over to Bootstrap, quite easy, we just press get started. And yeah, it offers this thing. You might recognize this earlier from one of the very first slides. So we can just copy this and chuck it onto our index.html. So one thing that's important to understand with all these head tags is the order is important. So it's important to try to put this Bootstrap tag as high as you possibly can. Obviously not above this stuff, but like in terms of link tags, because how HTML works is that it loads them one by one, and the last one has the most priority over all the other styles. So for example, if Bootstrap said all headings are like one size, it will be important to load that first so you can override them in your custom CSS file, which is what we're doing here. So our style file has the upper hand, has priority over Bootstrap. And yeah, so we have this, and they also recommend that we get a JavaScript file going. So this adds like extra functionality like popovers and modals and stuff. It's a good idea to always put script tags at the bottom below the body. And the reason you do this normally is because script tags are like code, right? And they take some time to run and process. So it's a good idea to load your entire HTML page first, and then go ahead and load the scripts. So it's a good way to like make your website a little faster, even though it's not too noticeable. And yeah, now that that's loaded, if we jump back here, you can already notice that it looks a little bit different. Like, first off, we don't have that ugly font anymore. It looks a lot cleaner. Yeah, it's already looking a lot better. I think we have to reload because there we go. So yeah, cool. That means that we have Bootstrap going. That's a good sign. And yeah, let's jump back into the slides. If I can find them. There we go. So now that we have Bootstrap installed, let's explore some cool features that it offers. So Bootstrap offers utility classes, which are pretty cool. So remember how we were defining all those rules manually, like margin and padding, and we had to do selectors and stuff? So Bootstrap offers a lot of utility classes that get this job done for us. So it allows us to add really nice styles to our elements without having to define rules ourselves. And honestly, they sometimes do it better than we could ever do as well. So it's really impressive. And they also offer a lot of cool features like breakpoints. So this is like where media queries come in. We'll cover it soon. But yeah, it's like a really nice way to apply all these styles that we normally would in like a quick succession instead of doing it manually. So you can take a quick look at the utility classes for margin and padding spacing. So you can see that it's just really short tags and they apply these styles. So empty is like margin top, 0, so it adds a 0 style. And yeah, we can try using it right now even. So let's pretend we have a my portfolio tag down here, and we want to like add a little padding below. So we do class is equal to, so it'll be margin bottom. And then it has numbers from 0 to 5. So if we want a big one, we can do 5. And you can see that it adds a nice little margin at the bottom. And you could do it, make it smaller. And yeah, it shrinks and does what you would expect. So yeah, you can also add a margin at the top. I think I might need to restart this. Let's do that quickly. Let's give it a moment. Sometimes it just likes to not cooperate. But hopefully it should be good now. Yeah, okay. Cool. Yeah, it's working now. So if we do margin top 1 and then 5, we can see how it applies those styles. And you can also say MX or MY to apply on both top and bottom. So if you do MY5, it will apply to the whole element. Take a quick look here. Yeah, see, it has MT1 and everything. So yeah. Okay, it is very laggy, but it's working eventually. Okay, anyway. Yeah, and another thing we can do is we can hide elements. So if you remember if you remember when I said that you might want to hide elements, depending on how big or small the screen is. So we can say display none to just hide it completely. I think we'll just switch to, let me just switch to this inbuilt preview. I think this will work a little better. Okay, there we go. See, this one's working. So if we have D none, you can see that it hides it completely. And then if we do DMD block, so this is saying if it's the screen size of MD, then make it a block. Otherwise, make it nothing. So if it's MD or higher, make it a block. Otherwise, make it smaller. And if we resize, you can see how it disappears when it gets below a certain size. And then when you grow, it comes back. So yeah, you can see how easy this is already. Like if you remember the media query types, we would have had to make like some big statement in the CSS file and like arrange all this stuff to make this happen. But these rules make it really easy. And you can also like do MX. These also have the MD tag. So you can add a margin of 5 to the left and right, only if the element is smaller than MD. And if I can grab this, okay, there we go. So it might be hard to tell with MX because it's on the x-axis, but if we try Y, you can see that it applies that margin. So it's very close to the top card, but when we go out, it gets nice and big. So yeah, that's how those tags work. And yeah, they're very useful. It's nice to apply just quick rules when you need to. It's still recommended to try do proper rules if you're gonna have like 5 or something rules applied to one thing. You probably don't want like 10 classes on one thing. But when you want to add like a nice quick spacing or something, these are really useful to just get the job done nice and quick. So yeah, and then next what we're going to cover for these utility classes is the grid. So remember if we covered Flexbox, you can arrange things and make them responsive based off the elements in your thing and like based off the screen size and rearrange things based off whether the screen is small or big. With grid, you can do that as well, but it's a lot more powerful because you can also specify the size of every element, how much of that space you want it to take. Like for example, in this image, this is what Flexbox could do, but then you could also make like one of them 8 or bigger than the rest, and these are 2, 2. So how Bootstrap's grid works is that it's split up into 12 columns, and you can arrange those, give those 12 columns to, like give them evenly to all the elements you want, or you can give one more of those columns than the other, and they will get more space on the page. So yeah, that's how Bootstrap's grid works in a nutshell. Yeah, so you can see how it might be more powerful than Flexbox since it would allow you to basically make some things take more columns than others. And it does use Flexbox under the hood, and it does that by applying like custom percentages and pixel values that you normally wouldn't want to do manually. So it's a very powerful tool to just make things responsive. So as an exercise, we're going to try make this like simple grid here into a Bootstrap grid. So to start, first off, we can just follow these steps really. We'll need a container, we'll need a row, then we need to add as many columns as we need, and then we can assign them sizes. So this is like a cool trick if you don't know yet. It's called Emmet. It's part of VS Code and WebStorm and any other IDE really. It allows you to basically make elements really quickly. So you can say we want a div of class container, and then we want it inside of it to have a div of class row. And then inside of that, we want div of class call4. So the reason we have 12 is because 12 is like dividable by like so many numbers below 10, right? So like 1, 2, 4, 6, whatever. So it's really easy to split it up into whatever sizes you can think of. So 4 goes into 12 3 times. So since we have 3 elements, it'll work in this case. And yeah, and then we do times 3 because we have 3 of them. And if we press tab, you can see that it just nicely created a grid for us. And yeah, so we have our grid sorted. And now to move these things in, before we do that, I just want to explore the documentation a little bit more to show you guys something. If we go to components, I recommend you just go through these yourself there. A lot of cool stuff here. But if you go to cards, Bootstrap has a really nice card element that looks pretty neat, right? Like it looks like so much better than ours, with the ugly image and all that. So we can try use this in ours, and they offer a nice little copy here. So let's take that and just chuck it in here. Put it in the wrong place. There we go. And you can see that it chucked the card in there. And we can steal the image from this one. So I'll take the image and chuck it in here. And we already have a nice card that looks way better than this one. And we'll remove this style since we don't want the width to be set explicitly. We want the grid to decide what the width is, right? Because that makes sense, right? It's going to be resizing things to make sure they fit. So it's not a good idea to have set widths when you're dealing with grids, since it'll mess everything up basically. And if you're curious about what REM and EM are, they're like font sizes. So EM refers to the font size of the parent, and REM refers to the global font size. So it's useful. It's a useful unit when you're working with font sizes. So yeah, you can look into that on W3 as well. So yeah, let's remove this. And cool, we have a little card now. And let's just copy and paste this to every column here. So we have all 3 cards nicely laid out. Cool, and we can get rid of this. We don't really need it anymore. So get rid of that. And nice, so this looks so much better. But you'll notice that it's not doing that thing that I promised earlier about it being responsive. You can see that it's kind of like packed up. So in order to do that, we need to use those breakpoint things that I talked about earlier with like the padding and stuff. So you can do the same thing here. You can say MD4, and this tells Bootstrap what size you want to have 4 at until you go vertical. So it will try to lay things out with these sizes, but until there's not enough space, until you reach the MD breakpoint, then it'll arrange itself accordingly, vertically. And yeah, there's a bunch of sizes. MD is medium, there's SM, which is small, and then there's XL, which is large. No, extra large, there's LG, which is large. So yeah, you can see that it's vertical, but then the moment when it's big enough, there we go, then it arranges itself nicely, and then it jumps right back to this size. And if we want a little gap here at the bottom, we can export the documentation for that as well. If we go to layouts, gutters. So gutters are kind of like, yeah, well, what would you expect, the gap between columns? So we can see that there's a nice rule here, just GY, gutter y-axis 5. So we can try add that to our row here. So we'll do GY 5. And look at that, it just has a nice little gap. And yeah, it looks really great and looks so much better. So you can see how useful Bootstrap is to just quickly prototype websites and just use pre-built components to make things look really nice. And yeah, one more thing that I think is worthwhile looking into is, one thing that I promised I'd look into was how to use the after tag to add a nice little line at the bottom here. So this still looks pretty bad, but let's try explore how we can add that nice line that I showed earlier to the bottom of this to make it look nicer. So we already have our H1 here with font size. We can keep that as is. One thing we probably could start off is just getting rid of this white background. It's kind of pointless. And things aren't updating again, which is great. Let's jump back into here and hopefully it decides to behave. Okay, there we go. So yeah, and we can set the color to white. There we go. So, and let's try add that nice bar at the bottom now. So if you remember, the way to do that was just to add like after here. And then now CSS has like added a small little element below this one to, yeah, we can't see it yet, but we can start bringing it out with the following rules. So first we have to set the content to nothing, right? The reason we do this is because, well, when you're selecting after, nothing really exists there, but saying content to empty is putting something into existence below this element. And yeah, and then next we need to say position relative. So this is a position thing that we talked about earlier for arranging things. It's like display, and it basically tells that we want to start arranging this element with like pixel values. So with that said, we could say we can tell it to be at the bottom. So this says to arrange it near the bottom. And so we can actually see something, we can set a predetermined width of 5 pixels. We'll probably make it a little bigger, like 20. And we'll set the height to 5. And we'll set the background to red. And God, it's so annoying this doesn't work. Let's try this one again. Right after it pops up. Cool. Okay, it didn't come up still, so it's probably and then we can say left 50%. So this brings it closer to this section. And oh yeah, also we need to do display block. I almost forgot. So display block, it just tells it to like actually be a block. Like if you remember, block is like that new line thing that exists. So yeah, and it still doesn't want to exist, but we can check that by, oh, there we go. Okay, it exists now, cool. So we can see that we have that tiny little bar thing there. So let's try like making it actually look a little better. So we can give it a bigger width, let's say like 100 maybe. Cool, so maybe 200. That's big enough probably. And you can see that it's pretty far. It's not really centered even though we put 50%. That's because the 50% applies to this top left corner. So in order to make it actually centered, we need to translate it, transform it by negative 50 pixels the other way. You can see that it centers now. So that's because, yeah, like because it's on the left corner, and then 50% here refers to the width of this element, of the little red line itself. So negative 50 is like, just undo that, just take away 50% of it so it centers itself. And we can add a nice margin to the top. And yeah, now we have this nice little red line on our element. So to make this look a little better, we can like add a nice color, maybe like a nice green like that. So yeah, that's pretty cool, but we probably don't want it to apply to all H1 tags across the entire page. So one good practice is to just make a class for this. So we'll do a .gutter, and now we can go back here and add that gutter tag to this. So we do class equals gutter, and that should bring it back. There we go. So cool. And the cool thing about that is you can go to portfolio and add the gutter tag as well, like that. And it's over here, but we can center the portfolio tag by just doing text center, right? Which is a nice utility class from Bootstrap. And yeah, look at that. So we have this nice after tag, and it applies to all headings. If we even were to add another heading or whatever, we won't have to make a new element for this. It will just do it automatically. Wherever you add this gutter tag, we could maybe even like add it to random things. So add a nice gutter for anything. So it's very useful to like add quick, nice little stylistic things to anything you can think of. And yeah, I think that concludes everything we can learn, at least from me, for Bootstrap. Let's jump back to the slides. So cool, yeah, we covered everything. So you're probably now wondering like, now what? Now that I have a nice base understanding of Bootstrap and CSS, how can I take my knowledge further and do more with it, basically? So I've arranged a few tips or like resources that I recommend for you guys to just keep learning CSS and keep growing that in your brain so you can get better and better. So one tip that I have, which is probably like my favorite, is to just look at other people's sites and just break them, right? Just play around with F12 instead of going and changing your grades. Like go and actually see how CSS is actually working behind the scenes, right? So there are a lot of cool websites that really talented people have made across the web. Like there's like stripe.com, which is like really fancy. This is a payment portal, and they have really nice effects. This is animated as well. And they have like really nice corners and edges here. And if you just press F12, you can just, now that you know CSS to a basic extent, you can try learn how they really built this, right? Like, oh, how did they make this like cool little thing? Oh, look, it's like a div and we have these styles on it, right? And if we can try look at other sites like github.com. I know their landing page recently got a revamp. Yeah, like look at this. And if you're curious about how they made that, like how do they do these, like this cool little line, you can press F12 and try work it out. If you can select it, there you go. See, this is an after tag like we covered earlier, adding an after tag to probably this dot. Then they add all these styles to make it possible. So yeah, that's one big thing I recommend. And also it's a little bit hard to try break down websites like this because they're like compiled, which means like they're like sophisticated to like really random words. Like you can see this thing makes no sense. That's because it's compiled to just gibberish. But if you want something that's a little more straightforward, you can try out templates. So if you look Bootstrap templates, you can find templates that look cool. Like for example, this one, you can just okay, probably one that doesn't cost money, but yeah, you can like find a template that you think looks really cool, and you can download it and just look at the source code and see how it works, how it takes. And that'll be a lot easier to do since you have the source code for yourself. So yeah, this is something I really recommend. Something that really helped me out is just looking at other people's work. And next tip is to look at CodePen. So there's a lot of people, really smart people on this website. I'll just show you that what CodePen is. It's kind of like a place for front-end developers to like flex their skills. So like if you just search something like, I don't know, about Melon, you can check out all these cool projects that people have made. And you can see how they did it. Like, it's pretty cool. They made like a Melon with CSS. So yeah, and the cool thing is that you can just look in here and see how they did it. So this is really cool. And they probably did it with like CSS animations. So you can like look at these terms, things you don't understand, just Google them, and you'll be able to try break down how they were able to do cool stuff like this. If you really want to be impressed, you can search CSS only. And these are projects that people have built without any like JavaScript or thing, which is really impressive. Like this is like a 3D book someone has made with just CSS. So that's crazy. And just by looking at these projects and see how they did it, you can learn yourself. And yeah, there's also YouTube. YouTube's a great resource. There's a lot of really cool, funny people. I've listed some people that I recommend you guys check out if you're curious. Yeah, I learned a lot from all these people. And of course, W3, we've been using it a bunch in this workshop. That's also amazing. Just look up rules and they have a lot of nice interactive stuff. And finally, if you think you're ready for it, you can try out CSS Battles. So it's like a fun, competitive way of learning CSS. You ask a friend, you challenge a friend, you send an invite link or something. And how it works is that you're given like an image. Like for example, you might be given like this cross on like the corner of the slide here, and you're asked, okay, make that in 5 minutes. And you both like have to scramble and try to get it done in 5 minutes. And then whoever gets the closest matching design, it's done by like a quick algorithm. Whoever gets like the closest matching CSS object wins. So that's a good way to like test your skills and see how good you are at CSS. So yeah, and finally, there's a few extra stuff I recommend you guys try learn yourself. About CSS, these like advanced topics, there's CSS variables. This is quite recent and it's not used too much. Like if you look at the styles for Strike, they use a lot of CSS variables. So it's just a way of like defining colors and stuff you can reuse a lot, so you don't have to like copy and paste the same hex hashtag thing. Yeah, and there's also CSS animations like that Melon we saw that was done with CSS animations, keyframes and all that. So you can play around with those and try like give your websites a good amount of pop. There's also grids. It's like a fancier version of Flexbox. It does what Bootstrap does, but it's like native to CSS and it uses its own platform. So it's a lot more powerful than Flexbox and Bootstrap, but it's also a little bit harder to learn. So yeah, you can also check that out if you like really want to know how to make like really, really impressive layouts that also resize. And finally, there's can I use? So as you mature as a web developer, it's really important to, of course, just making sure your websites work on all screen sizes, but also on all devices. So this is a really good website that kind of demonstrates that. Like if you have a feature that you want to use, it's a good idea to just check it out here and see if it's supported. So Flexbox is supported by basically everything, 99%. So you don't have to worry about that. But smaller features, like maybe this gap property thing, that's 86%. If you're making like a government website, you probably don't want 86% coverage, you want closer to 100. So yeah, these are like small things that really differentiate a good developer from a great developer, being able to know all these skills and use them as you create websites. And yeah, if I can jump back here, okay, cool. And I believe that's it. So yeah, thank you for tuning in. I hope you guys got something out of it. And yeah, make sure to check out our wonderful Lay's computer vision class that's happening like an hour from now. It'll be very cool. We'll be like using computer vision to make a robot work. And yeah, just anyway, it'll be cool. Just check it out. And yeah, you can check out the resources and everything on the participants handbook. And I'm also going to send out that GitHub repository. I'll send it again. This one. So I'll put the slides there as well eventually after this meeting. And so make sure to keep in touch with the Discord and yeah, fill out the feedback phone and best of luck for the hackathon. I'm really excited to see what you guys build. I'll be looking forward to testing them out. And yeah, that is it. I'll hand it back over to Raymond and Jonathan.
All right, thank you guys for coming to the workshop. Yeah, so we have links that is posted in the chat and also later in the Discord.